Well, good afternoon and welcome to the next lecture in the lecture series that we carry on every year. We have about 6 or 7 lectures spread throughout the school year. And I'm a little bit jealous because I gave the previous lecture and I had about half this much. So, I have to admit that some people definitely have the touch. We will be having further lectures, another one in April and in March, I believe, as well. So continue on. Hama, did you want to mention any of the speakers? Or?
I think Todd's up next in March. Todd Godwin, our research fellow this semester. I don't remember who's up in April.
It's from India.
Father Ignatius from India. We'll talk about discoveries in Indian palm leaf manuscripts. It's going to be really interesting.
So it's a wide variety of stuff. You never know what kind of things you'll be hearing about in your lectures. So, and with that, I would like to say just a couple words. Our speaker today is Professor Rachel Melis, who teaches in the art department here in Fine Arts, and she does the book arts and focuses especially on making new books and looking at the work of earlier fine press artists. I first got to know Rachel about 7 or 8 years ago, I guess, when she started bringing her classes to HMML. As it so happens, HMML is in charge of a large collection of fine press books at the turn of the century. And fortunately, we have a built-in audience here that she brought her classes, and it's been a wonderful ongoing relationship over the last 8 years that we've been able to share not just the materials with the students, but actually share the students, bring the students into our space and give them an opportunity to look at some of these things that may be 100, 200 years old up close and actually have that in close interaction with these things. Because with books, as we know, all books are very much physical items, not just texts lying out there in open space. And so she helps us to take on that other aspect of seeing books as things of beauty, things that are right there in front of us. Is there anything you'd like me to say about you? We were delighted that she would come here and do this talk for us. So with that, I think I'm just going to let you proceed.
Thank you. I want to say a big thank you to Matt and to Julie for inviting me here and working on setting this up, and everyone else at HMML who has made, you've all made me feel so welcome, and my students throughout all these years and all your iterations as you've gone through your renovations. I also want to thank my students who are here and all of my friends and colleagues. It's so wonderful to see so many of you here. And I want to remind Matt that his presentation was over the winter break. I apologize for not coming myself because of that. So, and I also want to send a sort of more distant shout out to all the curators of all the special collections that I've worked with in various places across the Midwest in particular, because I will be talking about work that I have done in multiple places here and elsewhere, and why I think that kind of touching into historical precedents, work from the past, is so important for the work that I do and we all do. So I will continue on. Bear with me as I will probably go from standing and sitting often. I'm at 37 weeks, so this is so I can call the hospital if necessary. And sometimes it does feel like the blood vessels here have all moved to here, so just bear with me. But I want to start with a quote that, other than the overuse of the word "only man," is a favorite of mine when thinking about the book. All of mankind is of one author and is one volume. No man is an island. So as I thought about this idea, I chose this because I think of what I do as collaborating with the past. The idea that if everything is one volume and one book, and the past is the present is the past, I want to connect with it, connect to people who have done similar work in other times. So searching the sea of the stacks, it's so easy for me to get lost in any library, whether physical or digital. And I like to bring my students into that way of looking at libraries and at collections. So the theme of this talk is going to be the things that I've done and the things I've encouraged my students to do that brings us into close contact with authors, artists, and book designers who have come before us, and then the kind of work we've done with that. So this is some thoughts on the importance of doing so. Certainly one of the things that is most important to me is to draw attention to people I think have been overlooked, or ideas that have been overlooked. And one theme you'll see in my work is particularly women authors and artists and designers, so I'll be bringing that out. But a lot of the work that inspires me, which I will also show you, is also about shedding light on current events through sort of untold stories from the past, or lesser known stories from the past. And I find this to be a great and easy way to find meaningful and seemingly original content, though it's not original at all, to bring out things that people have forgotten about. So it's perhaps an easy out, but a great one, I think. And actually I don't think it is easy. I think there's so much that you have to do in terms of being respectful of what you're working with, that it can be very challenging. I also, with my students, really like to draw attention to local resources. When I went to college in Grinnell, Iowa, they were just starting a Center for Prairie Studies, and it was really formative for me to take classes that brought me into contact with the works of that place, the artists who were in that place and celebrated that place, the biologists who were studying it, the history of it. And so whatever I can do in my classes to make my students aware of what's here and unique to here, I like to do. And it helps that I'm in some ways from here as well, so I'm proud of this place and want to share that. And then also in terms of the arts, for any art student taking an art class, here's my cousin, so see, from here. The importance in art of appropriation. There's a lot of contemporary art that has to do with that idea of pulling things from somewhere else, and the balance, I guess, sometimes between borrowing and stealing, but using work from multiple sources and making that part of your own. And so it's important for our art students to know how to do that. And I think also working with people from the past helps current students ease into the process of collaboration, because though you do need to be respectful of the people whose writing you're using or art you're using, it's not quite as challenging as working with someone who's right here, who is full of their opinions in the moment about how the art should end up looking, right? So the technical processes in making printed books are so challenging that I generally make my students work in teams. So they do have to work with someone else, but more often on the technical end of things, and working with a past artist or author or designer helps them, I hope, have a little point of agreement right from the get-go, that you have to pull together to work with this person. And it's useful to have some limitations sometimes too, I think, as a student, because it is a very unlimited design era right now with all the digital access. But speaking of digital, let's get to some pictures of examples that are so easy to pull out now from multiple places. So precedents for using precedents. People that I have looked to for inspiration, as have many others, and sort of some categories of how you might use books from special collections. One that you wouldn't directly take a book out of special collections and damage it by altering it, but there are lots of ways to get old books and alter them. So altered books is one category, which I'll show you a few examples of. I've then also gotten a lot of inspiration from historical fiction that's been turned into artist books. So that would be a very direct link to my work. Historical collections that have been turned into books, so a book of an entire collection or sampling from a collection. And historical fiction, of course, very broad category. I'm highlighting one book in particular that influenced the book that you see pages from is spread out here. The first one I'm going to talk about, Tom Phillips, a HMML, the little left-hand phone picture, iPhone picture. it's one of the few artist books or altered books I know that you can also read as an ebook. And he also made a version of it that's a book with a little USB drive that comes out of it, and you plug it in and get it that way. So I'll tell you a little bit more about him and his work. There's a lot of text, I'm not going to read it, it's just there for your reading pleasure. But Tom Phillips is an English artist who made a well-known in the book arts world book called A HMML, based on a novel that was written in the 1890s, that was called A Human Document. And he, I guess, challenged himself as he was going into a vintage bookstore with a friend to see if he could find a book for under 3 pence that might provide him inspiration for the rest of his life. And he did. So from 1966 on, he's been making work that is related to this book in some level. And the first thing he did was he altered every single page of the book very carefully. For those of you maybe who've read The Book Thief, it was a similar idea as a book in there that gets altered, Hitler's book. One of the characters in that book whitewashes all the pages and then puts his own story over it. The difference here, though, is that Tom Phillips didn't whitewash everything on the page. He left bits of the document to spill over and make a new meaning. And there have been other books since this, especially Jonathan Safran Foer's Tree of Codes, Mark Conley introduced to me, that does that, sort of cutting the pages out. So I think that one of the reasons that he chose this method of art making was to introduce the idea of chance, to give him some place other than his own mind to pull things out from and play with. And as he states in this excerpt from his website, he was really inspired by John Cage and other sort of more minimalist and also interested in chance artists to do this. The picture there is not of the artist, by the way, it's of the author of A Human Document, to illustrate that apparently he's a very serious man. And that one of Tom Phillips' goals also was to pull jokes out of his book, which you'll see relates to this book of mine in a little bit. Interestingly, though, Tom Phillips admits to never having read the book completely through. So it's a little bit different than where I come from. I do tend to take the text very seriously, and then try to make jokes in other ways, I guess. In terms of historical fiction that's become artist books, another direct inspiration for my work has been Margaret Atwood's Journals of Susanna Moodie, which I actually haven't read in a long time, but I read it when I was in graduate school, and it was sort of started me on a trajectory that I'll go through here. And certainly this book did a lot for drawing attention to this author who was not particularly, maybe had been well known and then sort of not so much, and Margaret Atwood kind of brought her back through this, which is one goal that I've had in my work as well. And then two artist books that have worked directly with collections. This one by Buzz Spector, Closed to Open. As you can see here, it works with the Swarthmore College Peace Collection. And he went through their photos of protests and found photos that showed hands, and literally shows these hands going from closed, clenched fists to open, more peaceful. So it's simply working with this photo collection and creating a book from it, which I find just very simple and powerful. And I should say, I have a lot of slides I'm covering, and I'm going to try to do some of the questions at the end, but you could also, if you have a question about a particular artist or work as I'm going along, please interrupt me. Another artist who I encountered in graduate school that was very inspiring for me was Maureen Cummings, and she works with also, I don't know if she works with sort of a single collection, but sort of collections of documents and images, often having something to do with social justice, war and peace, and slavery. This one is the one that I encountered directly in graduate school. That was about, it's called Stocks and Bonds, and it's a play on, if play is the right word, on the idea that stocks and bonds can refer to money and to torture. So it's a ledger book that she has then placed over the ledger these images and descriptions of different devices that were, I think in her words, sort of used to keep the systems going that certain people benefited from greatly. So, you know, there were people who made a lot of money off of slavery and also of torture, and she likes to point these connections out. I encourage you to check out her website if you want to see more examples. And then finally, in the historical fiction category, a big inspiration for me has been reading this book by Jane Smiley, which, hey, she's apparently set out in this book to sort of combat the story, the wrongs that she saw in Huck Finn and Mark Twain. Oh, there's a seat all the way over there. Yay! So I made my students come, and whether they, you know, their other classes fit in or not, oh well, right? No, so they actually have had to come and go, and some will have to leave early for other things, but I'm so glad they're here. So in this book, she, the thing I really found inspiring was both the era was really interesting to me, and I was living in Kansas at the time, so it was about the disputes over Kansas as a free state or slave state. But also that she was using the work of Harriet Beecher Stowe's sister, Catherine, and having excerpts from Catherine's book that, let's see, I was going to show, no, let's see, I don't, that one won't show the picture, so I'll just describe. She would have an excerpt from this home ec, domestic economy book, and then the rest of the chapter would sort of disprove or contradict the advice that was given, you know, like all young women should do this, and then the character does something very different. So that all leads to, toward this book I'll talk about soon. One of my precedents is in this room, Cindy Malone, and she and I had some time, some years ago, to talk about our books together. And Cindy created a re-binding and recontextualization, restructuring of Tristram Shandy, 1700s. Very, would we say modern or postmodern or both text that I think your words, Cindy, at the time were something to the effect of you approached the book as a very literal reader, like, okay, there's a document here, I'll put the document here. It talks about buttons, we'll have buttons. There's a gray page, we'll literally show it, which is very much how I was thinking about the illustrations for my book too. So sort of, again, sort of reintroducing us to a historical work with a contemporary view. And then another one I've been able to be close to is the Literary Arts Institute has published several books that have been produced in our book studio, and I was able to consult on and help find people to work with the author Ann Carson and the artist Kim Ano to create this latest book, the Albertine Workout. And it's a analysis of Proust, looking at this character of Albertine and gender and sexuality and fluidity of those things. And the book is right up here, so I encourage you all to take a look at it. It's unbound, so it's also sort of fluid in that way. And very much taking, you know, literally, again, what's in a text, and then using the way it's shaped in a book and the way it's illustrated, or as Kim claims, not illustrated, but just sort of given images to go with it as a way to show us another way to read it. So just again reminding of why, you know, that each of these authors I've looked at, or artists I've looked at, I think have in some way touched on the factors that I think are really important about looking at the past. Now I'll go into my books, and then I'll go into my students' books that have done this. So this is a list of the special collections that I have. It's probably not a complete list, but the main ones that stick out at this time. And the images that I have here, you can all hear me okay, right? The images I have here are of the books I'm not going to spend a lot of time on, but I just couldn't help but show briefly. Some of you may have seen a show that I had at Clemens Library a few years ago that was mostly altered books, which I think won me the reputation of the person who cuts up and destroys books, which is not usually what I think of myself as, but I had finally allowed myself to do so, and it was a lot of fun. So the altered books all started from the very last collection that I have here, which is thrift stores. So where you find the kind of things that sometimes you think, wow, why isn't that in the special collections? So I thought, well, since it's not, I'm going to cut it up, right? Then the book on the bottom is the cover for Annette Atkinson's History of St. Ben's that I was honored to be able to design, and that came out of research that I had been doing in the St. Benedict's College and monastic archives, finding images and ideas that might prove fruitful for myself and my students to make artist books related to the centennial. And then, of course, we're here at HMML, another resource that I have had the good fortune of using. And the ones that then sort of all led me to the work I'm going to talk about today and to here are where I went to graduate school, University of Wisconsin's Kohler Art Library, and Kansas State University, where I used to teach their special collections. And then between teaching there and teaching here, I was given a grant by the Friends of the Library at the University of Wisconsin to go back to Wisconsin and do more work there. So it kind of came full circle. I'm going to click on this link. I forgot to double check if my links work, so they do. Oh, good. One of the wonderful things about, just so you all know about this teacher resource or work resource, University of Wisconsin digitized its artist book collection. And it's a fabulous collection. It's one of the places that really started artist books as an academic discipline in our country. And so a lot of the images that you saw in my earlier slides were from their images that they've put online. And I actually got to be one of the student workers who started doing the metadata for this digitization. So it's great for me to see its fruition and be able to use it now as a teacher. So when I was in Kansas, having come from the University of Wisconsin where there was this great special collections, I immediately went and tried to befriend the special collections people there and start thinking about how I might use what was there in my work and in my students. And my students did make books inspired by their books. The main one that I made was from a book that I found there, and then also, and this is important too, I think, is that in this age, sometimes this kind of work where you work with a past author is easier because not only is it in special collections, but it might be available as a digital book that you can immediately sort of copy and paste the text into. And of course, we're here at HMML where digitization is key. So the fact that I could then take this text and I could put it into a design program and play with it and pull images from various public domain sources and from the Special Collections Library there meant that, and I forgot that I have it right here, it's always better to hold up props and hand things around. I'll hand a couple of these around. This one's to the mothers, so that's a good one for today. And then I should say this whole text was written in 1856, and it really is a woman who lived 6 months in Kansas and then kind of fled. It wasn't winter. Well, there was, all kinds of disease, and it was the conflicts going on, and she ended up actually becoming a nurse, I think in the same hospital that Louisa May Alcott was back east, and during the Civil War. So it was all, pre-Civil War difficult time. I think she lost family members to various prairie plagues. But the whole book was her letters home to her mother. So it's really touching. So these pages, you see this one's the dedication, this one's just a little bit about what she saw on the prairie. And I was trying to choose pages that were, well, I'll leave some of these open and you can look around. And I'm most proud in a way of these ones that don't rely on like Leonardo da Vinci's images, because that seems kind of easy. but I did use his and others to sort of put together this idea of, I guess, motherhood, children, and plants were the things that I was kind of really pulling out. Maybe particularly plants at that point. Not today, I'd probably start with the other first. But sort of her attention to the prairie. And the shape, the format that this book is in, is the shape of a, it's supposed to be like clutch purses, little purses, which, I doubt a woman moving to Kansas from the East Coast had any of. But I did want to sort of symbolize baggage and carrying things from one part of the country to another, and letters, so they also, of course, reference envelopes. My grandmother had passed away that same year, I think, and I inherited a lot of her collection of various fabrics. So fabrics and buttons that I wanted to use in some way. I did this piece, and I only made 3 copies of it. And then when I was done with that, I showed it to my former teacher, Tracy Hahn, at the University of Wisconsin, and she said, "Oh, this is very much in line with the special collections that we have here that you probably know about, but I didn't know about because I'd spent so much time in the artist book collection. I didn't know that there was also a women authors collection, American women authors collection, at the University of Wisconsin that was full of text and images just by American women authors. And it turned out there was a grant, the one I referenced earlier, available that I don't think any artist had applied for before, to go study in the collection. So I used this book to apply for that grant. Won it, was able to go spend a good, I think, 6 weeks of the summer between Kansas and here, starting this book. And I was just trying to find a few of the images that had caught my eye, and I thought that almost a nun, scary, scare tactics from the Presbyterians. It seemed like a really good one for here. So these are just a couple of sort of random. I was looking for images. I was also looking for. I came into it thinking, okay, well, I'm going to find some more women who wrote about the prairie and living in their cabins and sod huts, and yes, I'd always been a Laura Ingalls Wilder fan, so I was going to find these kind of texts and keep working with them. But I was also starting to get, I was getting a little bit tired of sort of that limitation, especially when my eyes were open to all this amazing writing that well-known women authors had done in particularly the late 1800s that I had not been exposed to, that I had not heard of. So they had been well known at that time. Some were still fairly well known now, but I had not encountered them. And it seemed sad to me that I hadn't. And I wanted to work with their extremely well done writing, rather than sort of the less polished journals that I was writing. So I was kind of moving from one to the other there. I also was getting a little more, bothered by the fact that it seemed to me like maybe I was participating only in only looking at one group of women's experiences on the prairie. And I still am, but I think at least now I'm looking at women who were writing about that problem too, or writing about their own lack of awareness or things that they were learning. And what I mean by that is that, the writing about the pioneer woman is sort of ignoring all the women who are being displaced, the Native American women. And I still am working with white women from the East Coast who moved up to the Midwest. But what I ended up doing was I found women who were activists, who were either abolitionists or suffragettes, and they had I'll move on to some images I'll explain these in a minute, but from their books. So I was looking at Margaret Fuller, Eliza Farnham, and Frances Willard, and then Carolyn Kirkland is the one that I first worked with here, who all had in common that in the late 1800s or mid-1800s, they had moved from the East Coast, or they had grown up in the Midwest, and then at some point they moved to or back to the East Coast and became writers. And so I was interested in the way that they had, I was getting less literal about showing things from the prairie and more interested in these women's lives and what they had to say, especially again about women's rights, about abolitionism, temperance, and there's all kinds of crazy interconnections where someone's in favor of one thing and not another, and that might not make sense by today's connections of politics. So I was getting fascinated by that. But still the fact that they had at one point been on wagons rolling across the prairie and gotten stuck in the mud and all these kind of similar experiences that happened to them. So Carolyn Kirkland was the first of these authors chronologically that I drew this connection, or I found this connection between. And I thought I'll start with her, and I'll make a series of 4 books. Okay, so the first book took me 6 years, so we'll see how many more I do get to, but I do hope to keep chipping away at them now that I have a template for it. So this is the first book here. This is the first copy of it, so it's a little bit beat up. I loaned it to Grandpa Tom, and he read it while eating his French fries, I think, one night. But I'm very glad he read it. He read it. I couldn't believe it. It was so this is. I decided to title the whole series "Unsexed and Unsphered," because it's a line from Carolyn Kirkland in which she is talking about the fear of what might happen if women become authors. They might become unsexed and unsphered. So that's very much what this first book is about. And what kept striking me was that Carolyn Kirkland was this early American realist, and her writing was really, I thought, really biting. And some people at the time found it biting too. Apparently, so I paired two of her books together. A book that was called A New Home, or it has other titles too, like A Home in the Forest and Who Will Follow. And that was about her and her husband moving to the woods of Michigan, the deep woods of Michigan, and they became one of those logging families that made sure we don't have deep woods in too many parts of Michigan. But she wrote about her experiences sort of encountering the inhabitants who were already in this little town they moved to, and she gave it a fake name, yet the people in the town still figured out she was talking about them, so it reminded me a lot of like Wobegon. And then she when she moved back east after a few years in Michigan, that was when she became engaged in writing more about women's rights, especially the right to write. So I found in this really innocent book called A Book for the Home Circle, Familiar Thoughts on Various Topics, Literary, Moral, and Social, a companion for the evening book, which is, that's the frontispiece for it, with the woman just contemplating on her couch in her impractical clothing. In this seemingly really innocent book, there was this essay called The Literary Woman that just I was amazed by. It's called Literary Women. Basically, she starts off saying, let it not be for a moment supposed that I'm actually saying that women should be able to write. Prejudices are very respectful things. We all should have them. But she basically goes on to beat down every prejudice and argument against women writing. Saying that literary ladies are hardly more abundant than dodos. So what's the big threat? Ending and going through, people like to say that if you suffer women to eat of the tree of knowledge, they'll only feed their children on books, and their children will starve. But there might be some benefits that could come out of that. And she's subtly weaving her way to this argument that ends with, where is it? Oh, this is from Grandpa Tom's parents. This is, if nothing else, how does she put it? She says something like, since it's well known that all men lose interest in all women after women reach the age of 40, that because our biggest value is in how we appear or look, that perhaps if we had something in our brains, husbands would still find this to be useful. And this is an image of filling the shrunken veins of decrepitude with the rich blood of bounding youth. So I chose to do a male pheasant as sort of this like transformation of this woman into something more. So I'm pointing all that out to illustrate, I think, why I found it to be such a funny and witty book. And then what you see is that I used images that highlighted these metaphors that had to do with birds, which I guess was a fairly common metaphor at that time, to talk about a woman as a bird. So there's the use of the dodo, but there's also, I'll pull it up, but I have slides of it too, so you might be able to see it better then, but Elizabeth Barrett Browning with a voice like a ringdove, yet she says such strong things. So, and then the one that really kind of started it all for me was, well, the dodo from that text, and then from the New Home book, the sort of Lake Wobegon book that's not directly about women's rights, she talks indirectly about the women who were new to Michigan and how they didn't have the tools that they were used to have had to do their jobs, that the men still had their plows and shovels and all the implements that they were used to, but the women had kind of left everything that they were used to behind. And she said, so no wonder he comes home to find the home bird drooping and disconsolate. So the home bird drooping and disconsolate. So I'll show you how to do that one. So I decided to pull out parts of both texts that use these bird metaphors, and for the other women I mentioned that I'll be working with, like Margaret Fuller, when I hopefully do get to them, they may or may not use birds, but they use something from nature that is a sort of a constant. So I'm trying to remember now if it was Fuller or which one I found used a lot about bees, and the queen bee. And sort of again pulling out like how nature could help us understand what women could do. So, but I want to point out that, so one of the things I think is really important about special collections and looking at archives is seeing directly the way that people used to illustrate or contextualize the text. Because the image on the right is from the book that holds that literary women essay that's so biting. The image on the left is one of these sort of like woebegone story kind of illustrations, which is funny, it's supposed to be a caricature, but it doesn't do anything to point out these deeper metaphors. Right? So I think I was both trying to pull out the humor like the caricature did, but also really pull out the metaphor and do, here's just the title pages of both sections of the book, to make those metaphors really literal. So again, quoting what Cindy had told me about her book, the idea that, I'm just this reader who doesn't quite get how these bird metaphors work, so I'm just going to draw them. And so I drew them and then turned them into copper engravings, because that was a historical method and I wanted to learn it, so why not? So it would look like an older kind of book. And so I'm showing a couple images that I drew from, because I'm also doing research always on how another artist portrayed a bluebird. In this case, it's Albert Durr portraying a dead bluebird. So I thought for the home bird disconsolate in its nest, the bluebird of happiness sort of dying was appropriate. A lot of my friends have called this some of my darkest work, so I think it's funny, but and then you can see maybe a little bit larger some of the images. Again, I encourage you to look at in person here as well. I hand tinted them all with watercolor, and rather I'm still in that process. And here's the Elizabeth Barrett Browning, and then the filling the veins of decrepitude. And in the end, I was able to have an exhibition at the special collections that had started in also at the University of Wisconsin. They have 10 glass display cabinets as big as 2 of these tables put together in their sort of entryway. And I was able to curate a show of the work that had inspired my work and my work together. So that was a really great process as well. And then getting to here finally, I want to point out that thanks to faculty development research grant that helped me keep working on this book here, and then thanks to HMML having this incredible collection of 19th and 20th century fine press books, one thing that was still stumping me on how to go about this series was, if it was so much about women and feminism, how was I to use a typeface, a font, that was from that era when all the type, as far as I knew, was designed by men. And I was trying to look for what would it mean to look for a feminine kind of font, or how would I go about that? And I was looking at, I was trying different ways to get at this question, and one of them was to look at simply the font designers that I inherently liked, and think, well, okay, they were male, but I'll find one that seems to speak to the text in some way. Little did I know that Frederick Goudy, one of the most amazing and well-known type and book designers from the early 1900s, had actually collaborated quite a bit with his wife, Bertha, and actually gave her credit for it after she died. but he wrote this memorial, and had I known him in person, perhaps he did throughout his life too, but I've looked through some of his books where in the colophon it'll state, maybe sort of very nominal mention of her assistance, but this book, after she died, is very affectionate testimonial to all the work that she did, designing the fonts with him and designing the books with him. And also, I forget if it was in this book or some online research I did, but I found out that she had been this bicycle riding, sort of ahead of her time woman in many ways, because the bicycle was a big deal to ride as a woman. You were really rebellious. And they met riding, or they courted riding bicycles together. So it's just so sweet. And anyway, that's to say then too that he had designed a font in her honor, a typeface in her honor, and then someone had turned it into a digital one. So with the grant money, I was able to buy the rights to use this digital font called Birth on Pearl. And then this is his testimonial to her, one of them. It's just so sweet. And that's a page from one of the books where he talks about a little bit about the work that I encountered here thanks to the Art of Appropriation collection. So I'm kind of choked up. It was so sweet. So the text is all, it started digital and then I turned it into photopolymer plates, which I meant to bring them, but I forgot. But they're, my students are working with them right now. They're plastic plates that you can make from a digital text or image that allows you to still print on a letterpress and get that sort of raised impression in beautiful ink and paper. So I'm going now, I'm going to end with my students' work, but segue a little bit with talking just about, HMML has been important to me for, in many ways, most for me, because of it housing the Archivardium collection, which includes these, or is primarily these fine press books from the late 1800s and early 1900s, put together by Frank Kaczmarczyk, who donated this collection here. And I think it's been so important to me to access these actual books and the things that are inside them too. I mean, you never know what you're gonna, here's the tribute to Bertha Goudy right here, and then here's a Christmas ephemera, presumably designed by Goudy, and the book is signed by Goudy, and oh, and Matt said I could hang these around too, I forgot. So, but please be careful.
You're not supposed to say that in front of my house.
Huh?
You're not supposed to say that in front of my house.
Oh, I mean, I'm just doing it. No, I think that's one of the amazing things about here is that my students have been able to touch the actual books. What did you say? I'm looking at my students who are here. I took a picture of when we were here last, but I forgot to do it till after the students had left. So you don't see them touching the books, but this was part of the setup that Matt had put together for us to come. He had every table in here covered with books from his collection, and they could touch them, it's so valuable because I think, again, the physical object and the illustrations and the title page and the cover and everything about it can teach us so much about the cultural context and values of the era that book was from. And there's not going to be time to go into a whole lot of this, but we've got a new home or who'll follow, and you see the very old version, the version you can still buy on Amazon, not very pretty in my opinion, but but then, I love to do just a search for, let's see, which one do I want to go to? I'll go to, University of Wisconsin has an incredible collection of Uncle Tom's Cabin from all over the world. So seeing, these are not necessarily the ones that they have, but seeing all the ways that different places and eras have what they've prioritized in terms of the image that's on the front, or the text that's on the front, or the binding, what's included, what isn't. And then I remember that the first time I'd ever encountered that idea of thinking about how different it was to look at one book from one era to another was when I was really into Anne Marie Gables as a kid, and I had several copies, from different times, and how some Anne Marie Gables were very innocent, and some were very sultry. And then I was really fascinated to find this one that you might see here, this blonde with the plaid dress on, is apparently a pretty contemporary book cover, and to see the sort of controversy, let's see, oh, no, wrong one, that came up with that, let's see. So, beloved children's character from Anne Marie Gables given sexualized makeover. and the one on the right is Megan Falls from the movie that I grew up with and adore, and made me feel comfortable as a nerdy girl with braids and glasses, and very different from this one that we're seeing today. So apparently Canadians are outraged. So we'll move on. So important to have access to these collections is what I basically want to get to here. Okay, so student collaborations, last but not least. In my book arts printing and design course, which primarily takes place in the book arts studio, I'm always pulling my students out to encounter various collections around campus. So again, the list I had before of why to do this. How am I doing for time, Matt? Is anyone- Michael?
It's 1:45.
Okay.
You're fine.
Okay. So the thing I'll add when I think just as students working in this area is that I think the book arts is a place where historical methods and contemporary methods are always being blended. We're using letterpress type, which we can show in the next slide, the wooden type up on the top right, and metal type. And we're also using photopolymer type, which is the one produced from the digital. You can use an out-and-out digital print. So why not also have your content be this mixture? This is another reason I would add for why to go to collections. Another would be that this is our, I don't know how we can read about our old listing of what the book arts might have required. One of those classes, Books to Bites, is no longer offered. That was a history class, book history class. So now I'm trying to work more of that book history into my classes as well. So HMML has always helped through that class and through other ways to provide that. So pulling that in as much as we can. So my students, again, they always have to collaborate with each other, and then I really like to tell them that they have to collaborate with a past designer or artist. So one of the things they have to do, and they can tell you better than I what this is like, but they have to give a presentation about the artist or designer that they encountered, someone they encountered here when we visited with the collection that Matt had spread out for us, and maybe they've come back and done research on their own as well. But they have to not only talk about what this artist did, but also what they think this artist would not compromise on. In other words, if they were actually collaborating with Eric Gill would definitely not let them do this, or would insist that they do this other thing. And then the things they think that if he were alive and working with them right now, what would he sort of be okay with? Like, all right, I guess I don't have to work with biblical imagery all the time. So they have to kind of come up with this story within a story of what the designer would allow or not. And no surprise, they're often most drawn to people who are also artists who have imagery. But some work with someone like Goudy, who basically is a designer. The very first time that we had this project, my students came up with, I told them they had to work with fables, and they came up with the title Animal Stories That Teach You a Lesson. And that book is over in that corner, I think. And Aubrey Beardsley, we saw work of his here at HMML. I can't remember now if we had directly seen Ben Shawn here, or if that student pulled that from somewhere else. But
I know we have some prints.
Yeah.
But we probably didn't have it out for the class.
Maybe, I'm not sure. It was Andy Julo, so he was here all the
Oh,
time.
right.
So a student who was also an employee or intern here.
He was, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And intern at Mary Brunel's Press as well. And I didn't plug that this was Mary Brunel's Press here. And was also going to point out that not only is collaboration important in my class, but collaboration is essential when you get out of these classes and into the book arts world, because very few books are made alone. If they are, they take over 6 years. So these are some of the artists that my students looked at. And then Andy, again, made this piece inspired by Ben Shawn, and learned how to foil stamp a little gold jewel from Mary's studio. And then another student made a piece inspired by Aubrey Beardsley. So you can see this direct visual link. And in this case, they made their own individual pages, but they had to bind them into one book. Today, I'm intending to do groups who then make a page that may or may not be bound in a book. Another collaborative book that a later class did was I decided to try to do a service learning project as part of the class. And we worked with Hands Across the World, which is an organization in St. Cloud that helps recent immigrants and refugees in the St. Cloud area learn English, find homes, get acclimated to the area. And so one concern that they were expressing was what was interesting to me is that they started expressing this, and then the next year NPR started picking this up as a big story, was sex trafficking in Minnesota. But it's one of the bigger, unfortunately, bigger states in the country for that. So we worked on posters and a book that were about those issues, and used writing by other students who have written about the subject. And so the book page that you see is again inspired by, probably male, late 1800s, early 20th century artist or designer, and then they had to make it work with this very contemporary, well, I shouldn't say that, it's always been an issue, but with how the issue's being framed today. So the images you see here were inspired by Albert Hubbard and Bruce Rogers and Franz Maserel, who are well covered in the collection here. And here's another by Aubrey Beardsley. So images and design of text by students inspired, in collaboration with these artists and designers. And then one of our more recent ones was spread out on the tables here and the tables in the back. Susan Sink is an area author who's she's worked on writing for the St. John's Bible, or not for the Bible itself, but about it. And she also had written these sort of poetic prose pieces about the sisters, oral reflections or oral histories. And it was St. Ben's Centennial, so we decided to, again, look at inspiring sources from here and then collaborate to make broadsides about these sisters' lives. So this one is Sister Roberta is responsible for much of the early herbarium collection. So all these specimens of plants from this region. And so the student actually went and got an herbarium piece, scanned it, so that's a digital print on the far right. And then the setting is a William Morris setting, who was one of the sort of founders of the arts and crafts, book arts movement in the late 1800s. So nice playing there. Here's others of the broadsides. And today my students are working on, they're taking quotations from upcoming Literary Arts Institute author, visitor Rebecca Solnit, who writes really eloquently about many, many subjects that obviously draw upon historical collections and research. But we've been working most with a book called A Field Guide to Being Lost. And one of the students is sitting right here, Lauren, who worked on this particular, you worked on this image, yes, right? So they collaborated on this image that was inspired by Elizabeth Shippen Green, who was a illustrator, and I'll try not to put Lauren on the spot, I'm trying to remember when she, in that same time period, late 1800s, early 1900s, and actually not represented in RDMs that we could find.
No.
So one thing we discussed is we need to find ways to get some more of the women illustrators and designers in here. But the piece that Lauren and Shooting chose from Rebecca Solnit was about why we don't let our children get lost or play in the woods or in the neighborhoods as much anymore. Then this image, I think, is a nice pairing with that. And using a children's book author makes a lot of sense for that, or illustrator. And then I do really want to be sure to also shout out to the fact that Clemens Library has a book arts collection that I've been able to help work on developing in my time here, and Kathy Parker and David Malone have really supported and made fabulous, along with everyone else in LAI and English. And it's the students in this room also got to go there just a few weeks ago, and again, get to handle these books. And so I like this one of Maggie, you're like, showing, looking closely, shows looking very closely, right? And they're counting these pop-up books and books that you don't see until you hold a metal mirror up and then the image appears. And so they're handling all these physical innovations that obviously help an art student. But I really also want to plug, if any of you are teachers of areas not in the arts, the subjects that this collection covers, just like here, where it's not just that these books are great for book artists, they're covering subjects that are essential to all kinds of histories and stories. And a lot of the books in the Clemens collection are really undertold stories, like actually there's a strong emphasis on peace studies and veterans' experiences and stories, local, regional kind of issues, international ones. So really encourage everyone to look at those. And just wrapping up, one of the last things that my students do in the class is they make an artist book where, whether or not I prescribe what writing they work with, at least they finally now work on their own without another collaborator from the class or a collaborator historically. But I like that they still, and I do oblige them to have a book that they're still kind of looking at for some inspiration. Like, it could just be the structure. Like, I like the way that this book uses a mirror or uses polyps or something like that. But I've been encouraged to see that they often still tap into some sort of history that maybe they encountered in our other searches through the stacks, or their own families to make the books. So the one on the upper left was a woman who was looking at her grandpa's life story. He had apparently written a book of it, and she pulled out excerpts from that. The one on the upper right is kind of a mock of an archive. It's sort of a fake archive about a dinosaur. And then the one on the bottom is a poem that a student wrote, and then she made the structure based on a structure she saw in the Clemens Library books. So it's just stolen directly from this other artist's design, but that's what we do. It's legit, I promise. And so just to end with, that there are many other ways that my students have worked with older books. We've done altered books, which some of you maybe saw recently at Clemens Library, where 3D design drawing students took books that had been, what's the word, decommissioned from the library, and pulled them apart and made them into sculptures. My students, at least one, well, two, if we count Andy, or at least Wright, have done internships here. So Dr. Grinnell worked with Kate Minich last year on I thought very successful internship that she had moderated by myself and Cindy Malone. And then my students have also found some pretty direct inspiration from the St. John's Bible. Andy Julo again decided he really wanted to make his own Bible while he was here, and did. Not every page, okay? It was actually an Easter Vigil book meant to be read at the Easter Vigil. And then I also have had students who have been student employees here at Clemens Library working in the book arts collection and Joe Colmo Archives, which I also encourage anyone who hasn't yet seen that to go check out at the St. Benedict's College Archives. Joe is an incredible printer and designer and sculptor here that we have the archives of. So to be continued, I'll keep working with these collections, and many of my colleagues already do. I'd love to see other non-art classes, as I say at the bottom, using book arts collections. And of course, I'm always really happy whenever someone tells me that there's some funding or opportunities available for students or faculty to use these collections, because sometimes it takes that little nudge or assistance to pull people into it. And let me know if I can help, but not in the next 3 weeks or maybe the next 6 months. I'll be back in the fall, but I'll be on leave after March 1st. And Mary Grinnell will be teaching my class after that time. So, yeah. So, thank you so much, everybody. In our remaining time,
Yeah, we asked beforehand, we said, well, it'd be a possibility people want to ask a couple questions. There are also lots of things out to look at, and so Rachel's open to either. If you have questions, go ahead and pose them. Otherwise, she can show you some of the things that are out and tell you a little about them.
Well, let's do this. If there are a couple questions generally, we could do that, and then maybe you can just go ahead and start looking, and I'll float around, and we'll have a post-reception for a few minutes. We're just diving into the box of the prints,
The sex drafting book is here.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, thanks for pointing that out. Yep, and this is from the altered books that were at the St. Ben's Library. So this is one of them.
Oh, cool.
This is the book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And it had so many parts where it talked about that you should, one of the ways to get, I know someone here who we've talked about this before. One of the ways, to get people to work with you, to like you, etc., how to win friends and influence people is to listen, to be a good listener, right? Which, I've just been talking at you, so you probably hate it. But the book is so full of admonitions to shut up and listen that I thought it almost created a whole other anxiety, and so this poem is supposed to be about that anxiety. Like, I listen, and I'm trying to figure out what to say. So that whole series of how-to books that I sort of constructed. So that's what that is. You feel free to handle this book. The images in it are not in color. The color versions are here. And yeah, all the books out there, some of them I didn't mention, most I did, are the collaborative ones that the students collaborated with each other and with HMML artists to do. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
She's good. Yes, please. And her blood work was good. I talked to her last night because I wanted to know if they wanted us.